Um, how many people here know Zach Bell? Raise your hands. Okay.
Great.
How many people here know that Zach has recently launched a podcast? Right. All right. So Zach has recently launched a podcast, and actually he and I have been in a conversation about this podcast for the past year, or about his goals of sharing things with the world that has turned into a podcast for about a year. And this is a really beautiful opportunity to talk a bit with close friends about why you are doing this and what you're trying to bring out in the world, and hopefully, in a sense, model a bit of the unique offering that you want to give. That's why we're here. So my name is Eamon Armstrong. Hi. I won't ask how many people know me because I know how many of you know me. I host a podcast called Life is a Festival, and I really like conversations, and Zach really likes conversations. So we're going to try to keep it to an hour or less. So don't worry that it's going to go on for too long just because we like talking to each other so much. Really appreciate the Portal having us here. Shout out to the Portal. Thank you. This is a really special space. It's my first time here, and it's gorgeous. So thank you for having us. Zach, you want to say anything by way of welcome?
Well, I do want to say Eamon said we've been chatting for a year about doing this, and what he really meant to say is Eamon has been my mentor.
Oof.
And if you in this, and has been a coach, and has been wildly helpful, and if you have ever had desires to express yourself into the world, I wouldn't have been able to do it with anywhere near the speed, rapidity, and like success in which I have with you. So thank you so much. So
that's very sweet. Also, don't hold me responsible for what he does.
Yeah. So if anything I do is Eamon's fault.
I'm giving him the tools. How he uses
fault.
them. I'm helping him with the tools. How he uses them is entirely on Zach. So just before we kind of dropped in outside, and you said something to me, which I loved hearing, which is you've had so many projects, you've done so many different things that have made you money, and this does not make you money. And I've cautioned you that it likely won't. And what you said is that with all these different projects you've had, this is the thing you most want to do. You want to do it all the time. You want to host conversations and share them with the world. Of all the stuff you've done, which we can talk a bit about that so that people can kind of be located a little bit more in you and your life and the trajectory of your career. But just to start, like, why is this the thing you most want to do? Why do you care so much about this? And by this, I mean conversations with Zach.
I like we're starting with a chill, easy question.
That's all the banter you got just now. Now it's all hard and hard
No,
balls.
so I think when I first started out, like when I first got to California, that's what I considered when I first started. When I first got to California, I was really aware that there was the internet had unlocked something, and the world was going to transform because of it. And my theory was it was going to transform in a way that it transformed in the 60s. Like there would be a cultural movement in the same way that we see it in the 60s. And part of me was just devastated that I was born a generation late. I thought that was the moment that it really happened. And when I got to realize what was going on with technology and communication and the internet, I realized that all of the people who were the thought leaders of the 60s kind of transformed into the people that created the internet revolution, and we succeeded, and that it would create a large social movement, and we'd have to redefine everything. We'd have to redefine community and identity and how we collectively make decisions and how we come together and how we express ourselves. And I just wanted to be in the middle of that. I wanted to be in the middle of that, figure out how I could help. And that's why I got to Esalen, and why Mac and I started bringing thought leaders together in our mid-20s with Return and with Esalen. And then,
can you share a little bit about what Return is?
Yeah, so Mac and I, for those of you who don't know Mac Murphy, in any way that anyone could, grew up in Mill Valley as well as Esalen, and has family heritage of his father's the founder of Esalen. So one of the first conversations that Mac and I started having was, what's the future of this movement that your family was instrumental in starting, in which you have become a major steward of? And the conversations were, what's the future of this thing? And what we started to realize is that the cultural movement that had an identity at Esalen in the 60s was alive and well today, but the people that were doing it didn't have a meeting space. They weren't coming to Esalen for workshops in the way that they were in the past, like that. And we were like, these people are all over the world doing different things. Let's bring them back to Esalen. So Mac got us a 15-minute board meeting at Esalen where we explained this concept, and they said, sure, you can try to do that. So we ended up renting out Esalen, and we were 25 years old running around San Francisco saying, we are bringing together the Alan Wattses and thought leaders of the 60s of today to a private gathering in Esalen. And it took off, and we got some really, from the founders of Burning Man to the founders of Google and everywhere kind of in between that, we started to see the intersection point of this. And Return has now hosted 27 different gatherings, mostly at Esalen all around the world on these topics, everything from redefining relationships and sexuality to redefining, we had one on currency and with people who created cryptocurrencies to a bunch on the religion of no religion. So we've been having a conversation about what is this cultural movement that we're part of, and how can we all get more involved, and how can we maybe define it a little bit.
So you didn't record that then, and you are wanting to record and share things with the world now. Why did you not record that then, and why are you putting things out in this format now? What's different?
Yeah, I think, so everyone here, I've had a lot of conversations with a lot of people here over many years, and the conversations and the mindset shared within our community is wildly inspiring and optimistic about the world. How we use technology, the things that we're building, the solutions that we're creating, solving world problems, it's wildly optimistic. And because of that, I'm wildly optimistic about the world, and so are a lot of our people in our circles. What I realized recently is that's a private conversation. That happens at curated conferences, things like Summit and TED and World Economic Forum, and these small gatherings like this. So normally I would do this with y'all here, and I realized that when you share what we're up to, or what the optimism that the builders have, many people feel the same thing, but they can't find it anywhere. That story is not in the mainstream narrative. So I decided to just start having the conversations with my friends that I've been having and giving them to the world. And as casual as we can, without preaching or teaching or anything like that, just sharing what people are up to and the why behind what people are doing, what we're doing.
Okay, so what you're putting out in the world you feel is not currently findable. What's closest? What stuff is in the world right now that you like?
Life is the Festival podcast with Eamon Armstrong.
Oh, wow. I really teed that one up for myself. That was good. That was quick on your toes. You'll be good at this.
I don't see a central place for it. You see these things like these really inspirational people that are selling a lot of transformation online. And while that's kind of part of it, I don't feel like I've never wanted to buy transformation. So it's not what I'm looking for. I just want to almost like the process of doing this is the process of defining it. But there's disparate pockets all over the world of people having a really similar conversation.
So you just said that doing this is defining it, which I really appreciate hearing from you, because I've said the same thing about your show, that the doing it will define it. And I think that that's part of why today's conversation is Zach Bell and friends. I'm one of the friends, but I'm not the only friend. And I think that part of bringing out these conversations, and we'll get deeper into like talking about these topics that matter to you, but also if you're interested, you get to choose to just be an audience member and enjoy yourself and imbibe, but also we'll have some space to participate. And what I'd love to see for you, Zach, is to just keep testing and refining this as you're going, because you've got something good for sure. And it needs to get weather tested over and over again. And that's part of what's beautiful about a podcast is it's iterative. You put it out, you get responses, you get people's feedback. It's iterative, and you keep going.
Well, so Elise made a good point where we were coming home from a few of you were at the conversation on Friday night with Caveat from Burning Man at the Robot Heart residency, and Elise made a good point that I always ask everyone the same question and nobody really answers it. And the question is, and I'll kind of put it out to the group a little bit, like, do you all feel like you're part of something that's much bigger, that's not geographic and not based on race, religion, or geography, like a larger cultural movement of a large values-aligned set of people who believe in the regenerative land practices and open sexuality and opportunity for people, regardless of race, religion, or anything? Like, we all kind of have these same things. There's been books on it called The Cultural Creatives. There's a movement happening it's spiritual but not dogmatic. So the question I always ask everybody, and the question of the podcast really is like, what is it? Because if that thing can start to talk to each other, the onboarding, it would be easier to get involved with. Right, like the onboarding ramp to this world that we all live in is really hard because there's no there.
When you say what is it, do you mean what is the network of people? What is the driving ideology? When you say what is it, I'm not sure what is.
I'll use an example from religion that I always really like. Like if you say you're Jewish, people let's not go with now, but if you say you're Jewish, people are like, here's a book, here's a school, here's buildings you can go to, here's a schedule, here's a hat, here's a pin, here's a necklace, and here's where you go when you ask questions, and here's the schedule of your life. And it's like pretty straightforward. Wherever you go, if you're Jewish, you can find the people, or any mainstream religion.
I feel like we get hats and necklaces, at least. I feel like we get hats and necklaces. I have like a sparkly marching band hat.
Some of us do, but that it should be bigger than that, right? And so if you say you're spiritual but not religious, people say the narrative is, great, here's every ritual, rite of passage, and spiritual way of being that's ever existed on the planet. Good luck.
And that's what you would broadly call like New Ageism or like spiritual culture. This sort of like this smorgasbord.
That's a micro, yeah, and it's like, and there's no, and that's why you see people being lonely. They're like, I'm bouncing around from religion to religion. I'm doing a Vipassana meditation and a Ashtanga yoga class, and I'm eating vegan, and I'm doing TM meditation, but then I'm like creatively manifesting. It's like, I'm like burning Palo Santo with sage, but those are from different tribes, and I'm putting them in an abalone shell, and that's weird. And should I do a sound bath, a sound meditation, a sound healing, a sound ceremony? I don't even like, it's just like, it's all, but that's so radically new.
I feel attacked. Aside from the vegan part, I feel like I've done most of that stuff.
Yeah, I tried vegan for a little bit. I was raw for like a year. So it's what is that? It's not, and everyone who does one of them does all of them. It's not like, it's not, we used to joke. I did a return gathering years ago with, we brought together leaders of communities. So one of the CEO of TED, the CEO of Burning Man, my friend Yarrow from Hatch, and some of the founders of Summit and the founders of Burning Man, or Esalen. And what we realized is, no matter which one you go to first, you then go to the rest of them. So that we're all onboarding ramps to this ideology, worldview, or mindset.
And a point with that too is I've done a lot of these ones, and the I know, and the big thing here too is like, well, you got to do it, but you got to integrate it, and you got to like change your life with it. You can't just do it, or then you're chasing peak experiences. But then the only offering to not just chase peak experiences is to, quote, integrate, which as far as I can tell means do more yoga and meditate more. I don't know what kind of integrative practices everybody has, but they seem to be the same things that you're supposed to just do to make your life nice. And I feel like what's interesting too about this kind of like buffet of spiritual traditions is that you're like, I'll try this, I'll try this, I'll try this, I'll try this, but they are quite disjointed, and it can be kind of like an adventure as if the world is a playground of the self, which doesn't really ultimately, at least in my experience, hasn't taken me where I think I probably should be.
Yeah, we self-optimized enough to the point where we have tens of, if not hundreds of millions of people who've done something or have tasted this somehow. But then there's no way for those people to do anything together. And you almost start to see, Elise and I hosted 55 thought leaders, practitioners, lineage carriers in the spiritual but not religious world about a month ago at Chosen with our nonprofit Namuna. And one of the things we noticed is they're all almost unconsciously competing over the same clientele, right? But if they were to be together, they could share more, but there is no way to be together. So if you look at from return to what I've done with My Place, which is about connecting communities to share more, specifically with housing, to what we did with Habitas, was redefining hospitality experiences around connecting community. These were all, part of me thought, if I do a business and that works in this mindset, then it proves my theory. And I think while all of those have worked, and depending on how you define working, they've all done quite well. I think today what I'd rather do is just share the story, because I think I don't want to make people sign up for an app. I don't want this to be behind a brand. I don't want it to have a business model behind it. There's enough mechanisms out there, I think, where people, if they just hear that many other people have the same mindset, it'll help people like rest into it a little bit more. Or even myself. I'm good at this. I've been building community my whole life. I have tens of thousands of phone numbers in my phone. I've hosted millions of events. There are hundreds of events. And sometimes I just feel really lonely still, because I still don't know what the heck I'm part of. And I know, and when it comes into election cycles, it makes me feel even lonelier, because although I am going to participate and get involved in the American election and that system, because this is the country that I currently have a passport of, it radically doesn't address my community. It's such a small microcosm of what I'm actually part of, because my world is what, and all of our worlds are much larger than the American institution or any individual nation right now. If you look at things, I always like to bring this little story up that I think people find surprising, but hopefully not in San Francisco. Remember the Mark Zuckerberg trial when he was on trial in the US with the government? First of all, if you've never watched that, smoke a joint and watch that from beginning to end. It is comedy, like the best you'll ever see. But second, the thing that's really interesting about that is not anything that happened in the trial with Mark Zuckerberg in the US, is the fact that he was on trial in 86 other nations. Because that's the impact of that technology. So it's so much larger than the nation. And there's a book that I cite all the time called Imagined Communities by a philosopher named Benedict Anderson. And he talks about how every few hundred years, when our technology changes, he tracks about 2,000 years of human history, and he says every few hundred years, when our technology changes, our ability to perceive who our people are change. And so the title of the book is Imagined Communities, and that quite means communities are just imagined. There's no such thing as a community. You can't touch it. Like, we do reality objects to make our communities feel real, like passports and social security cards and flags. A flag is just a reality object to make something that's not real seem real. And so when the printing press came about is when we had the rise of the nation state and the Protestant Reformation. We had a major change in civilization. We invented the internet, jet engines, and antibiotics in the last 100 years, and the nuclear bomb, and we still are trying to organize ourselves in these little land boxes. I mean, in the 70s, there was a photo of the Earth from the satellite, and it radically changed our ability to perceive who our people are. But none of our institutions have changed yet. So what I think is happening at a large scale is that people are searching personally for, just myself, I'm searching for identity and community in the places that it was in the past, but it's no longer there and it's somewhere else. And I just don't know where that other place is, but I know it's there because I can see it as I travel, because the conversations are so consistent. But I don't think like 30 years after the printing press, someone was like, there's gonna be this thing called America. We don't know what it is yet, but I know that we're all building it.
So my podcast is Life is a Festival, and I try to tell people it's not a podcast about festivals, because that's been my access point, is like, live your life like you're at a festival, i.e. like at Burning Man. Like, how do you live your life in this kind of experimental, open-hearted way? Which to me, it's like serving the same culture. It's serving the same thing. And I've had the problem of like, what do we call ourselves? And I think that like so many of us have been really grounded in the Burning Man community. And so the idea of burner that's an identity that doesn't seem to catch everything, but it seems closest.
Yeah.
Tell me why I'm wrong with that being what you're looking for.
So it's the story that we came up with years ago is that the revolution that we've all want to see, or that cultural revolution that we all feel like needs to have happen, it probably has happened. And the only place you can feel it, the only place I've ever been able to consistently feel it tangibly in a specific location is Burning Man. So whatever the it is in Burning Man, but it's not called Burning Man because it's far bigger than that. And that's what has been really impactful for me. This is what I did when I was an advisor to Burning Man org for many years. And we kept trying to say, it's not, burner, but the Burning Man ecosystem gets hundreds of millions of views every year, and there's a lot of people who have subscribed to the ethos who have never been to a regional burn, don't plan to go to Burning Man, and don't want to go to Burning Man. And that the identity of Burning Man freaks people out. It's a high bar of entry, and it shouldn't be relegated to just that because it's far bigger. I think the most profound moment I had in the realization of this process was I was at this crazy villa in Ibiza with all these wildly wealthy people who go to Burning Man and have started these creative companies, and I flew with Mike Zuckerman directly from there to a refugee settlement in southwestern Uganda. And I literally had the same exact conversations with the people there that I had at that house in Ibiza. These are people who, how so it's kind of funny, if you look on the bell curve of wealth distribution, there's what's happening that's interesting right now is the same conversation that's happening in the wealthiest communities of the world are happening in the poorest communities of the world. So I'm not living where I was born. My community is dispersed all over the world. I don't feel at home where I am right now, whether that's by choice and affluence or by force, and you've been kicked out because of war or climate change. There's 2 billion people on both, 1 billion on both sides who are both having a really, really similar conversation right now. And the same thing, the thing that's true of all of them is they're all holding a phone. I was just in India and I was remarking to a woman that worked at one of the places we were. I was like, wow, it's so different last time I was here than 15 years ago. She looked at me like I was an idiot. She was like, yeah, it's different everywhere than it was 15 years ago. I was like, why? And she was like, because you didn't have a phone. You were navigating India as a 20-something-year-old with no phone, and now you're navigating it with the phone. It's just the whole world is different, and I don't think we give ourselves one of my main passions is we don't give ourselves enough credit. Like we're all San Francisco people here, right? We're sitting in Mill Valley. Remember 2010 San Francisco? You were there. It was like the mission of these big tech companies, like connect the world. It was so inspiring that the smartest people from around the world moved here to do that. And we did it. The collective community, global world did it. And now we're just vilifying the thing as just the worst thing that's ever happened. But like today, you can get a phone, you can get a message to anyone in any language instantly for free, everywhere. Like that's like where's the applause? Where's the step back and be like, okay, great, we built this tech that we've talked about that we knew would change the world. What are we gonna do with it? How do we now get these people together? I don't feel like that conversation's happening anywhere. And instead, everyone's like, they're trying to, like the AI is gonna kill your mom, and it already
has.
It already did.
Now your mom is
It's
AI.
like you don't even know it yet, but it did. Like, and you're like, oh God, like, oh, probably not. Yeah.
Okay, I want to rewind to you used the expression barrier to entry, and I like to have contentious questions at the end of a conversation, but I think this is now is the moment for this. So you talked about this bell curve, and you talked about the wealthiest people are having a conversation, and the least well-resourced are having a conversation. Yes, and those are very different conversations that are not connected, and they're not connected in a pure relationship. And if we're talking about a movement that could be beneficial to the world at large, then I would argue, as being a part of this community, that the barrier to entry to this community is massive. And not simply resources, but also cultural connections, also values. Like if this is something that you deeply believe in and you want to see proliferate through the world, I would argue that a defining feature of it is a kind of exclusivity. And actually, I don't know if we have this thing without wealth. Like this thing that's so exciting that we love, we go to Burning Man. You're talking about flying around the world. Okay, so that in itself is we are the most privileged people doing that. And so the question is this actually transferable? Is there trickle-down spirituality? Is that what we're looking for? Like what is the thing that includes all of us, that lifts up the people who need to be lifted up the most? Like what is that version of this? Because I don't see it now. As part of it, who loves it, who promotes it, I don't see it now. And I think that's got to be central to the conversation, or it's meaningless.
Yeah, I mean, this is where we tried to get with the conversation with Caveat on Friday night a little bit, and I don't think we landed it as much as we wanted to. But
well, we're going to land it now. We're going to solve
land
it.
We're going to figure this out
right now.
Make sure you have notebooks and figure it out. No, so the conversation that I've had that informed me some of the most was a conversation around the Renaissance in Florence in the 14th century or 1400s. And there was a mindset in Florence that's well documented that wasn't about the wealthiest people in Florence weren't taking their resources out of Florence and putting them somewhere else. They were the general sentiment internally was, have I given it enough? Have I given enough of what I've gotten from Florence? Because the more I would put into Florence, the more it would give back to me. And it was directly tangible. You would make all this wealth, you'd pour it back into the city, create culture, create art, inspire artisans, and that mindset created a thing that we now look at and call the Renaissance. That's those same conditions that existed in that era are very much present and alive right now. The creation of currency, that's governed by a new body, a new group of people. There's extraordinary wealth that's transferring to artists, but it's really specific right now. And there's a wildly impactful new communication technology that's been unleashed in the world. Those are really key things. The problem is we don't know where to put the resources back in. And it's obvious, and it's clear to many people, and you see it on the news, specifically the wealthiest people in the world, who are like, it's definitely not my, and I use the word local to describe a not national government. It's not my national government. It's not my local government. Because the problems that we're addressing are way bigger than any specific locality. If you look at the rainforest, we now in our generation can see the rainforest from above. Let's talk about the Amazon, right? It's in 5 different nations who have 5 radically different socioeconomic conditions and have very different needs. The idea that those 5 competing needs could effectively govern one resource is absurd. So we actually are seeing absurdities and have no mechanism for dealing with them. So I don't know what the mechanism for dealing with it is, but if we can figure out what we're all part of, I had this conversation, and this can be quite contentious. There used to be when there was defined social classes and the aristocracy was a thing, the aristocracy was burdened with responsibility because they had time and education, and their responsibility was to help people. And this was a deep responsibility that was felt, and often at that time, if you didn't, you had your head cut off eventually. So what I'm saying about the reason I bring that up is like, we have time. The wealthiest people in the world have time and resources and energy to try to figure this out. And it seems like it's so big of a problem or of a challenge that no one's really figured out how to target in on it. Of like, how do we collectively spend resources to solve ecosystem level problems at a global scale?
Okay, so I am not asking you to solve this by any means. Okay. And I actually don't think that that's your role to solve it. The point that I'm making is very specific. You have a desire to define a certain cultural momentum. And not necessarily defined to own it as yourself, but be able to describe it in a certain way. And my challenge to you is that as you go about that process, that must be inclusive on a level it is not inclusive now. And that part of your job is to do that.
Hence this, right? Like, I don't want you to have to come to a $5,000 event to be part of this. I don't want you to have to go to Burning Man. I don't want anyone to have to go to anything to be part of this stuff. I think just being part of the conversation can help people find other folks like them, even if it's not their neighbors in their building.
And something too about the point about helping, and to just define even more clearly what I'm saying here, is that I don't think that what you're looking at culturally and what you're trying to do is about accumulating resources to then help people, or even about helping people. You're talking about a global movement of a kind of cultural acceleration. And I don't think it's interesting that accelerates and then gives back. I think what's interesting is that everyone accelerates, and the people who are let's say are limited or burdened in such a way that they're moving the slowest are brought on to that wave, and otherwise it's just partying in power. It's not interesting.
Yeah, I mean, there's an argument to be made that it is. That's already this is happening. Like, we don't need to define it to make it happen. This is happening. The world is, yeah. Yeah, throw it out.
So, you go on the internet and you look up what's the purpose of Burning. It says it's about self-expression and the rejection of corporatism and capitalism, right? But it doesn't give
Did you say that on the website?
It's on the internet.
On the internet or the Burning Man website?
This is on Google.
Okay. That's a Reddit
thread. Is that an AI automagic response?
From Burning Man website. The mission of Burning Man is to facilitate and extend the culture that is issued from the Burning Man event into the larger world.
Yeah.
What I'm trying to say is that when we go to return, right, and we're talking about community, and then I leave and I talk to Patrick Bosworth, who works in the White House, and I'm like, what you think? He's like, that's great, but it's cute. Like, all people who are wielding power look at what we're doing, like, that's cute, but you're not actually making decisions. right? And so I think that, Zach, what you have the option to do is to define the mission, right? Because if you don't have a mission, then you can't get people behind the mission. So I think that like what we're missing is a unified mission, and the same reason that people are frustrated with the U.S. government, they're frustrated with Burning Man, is because there's no transparency into how decisions are made when people are elected. And so you can't get behind an organization that people are all frustrated with.
Yeah, I mean,
Zach, can you repeat his question
it kind of,
for the recording
I
and
think
also?
the question was, can you, if I can summarize, this culture or wider movement, whether it be the U.S. government or Burning Man organization, there isn't a mission, and so that there's an opportunity through these conversations to define a mission.
Yeah, I think if you can define a mission and you can get people behind it, because right now, people don't know. I agree with you.
Yeah, I mean,
There's something better. There's values.
there's values and mission. It's all of that.
But I think that if you, as a company, if you don't have mission, vision, and values, I think it's hard to get people behind to motivate, because I think that you need people to understand what they're putting their energy behind.
That's what's so funny about the philosophical construct of company. Like even in the nation state, counties are companies. It has to have a mission and bylaws and what's something for in the shared everything and of our vitality is this communion of our own values. And just playing here, the invitation,
Yeah, please.
what are your values? If you erase the company structure and flow more, it's a very feminine construct. It's wild, it's unraveling, it's feeling, it's flowing and coming back. It's very different than a mission and going and constructed and returns and checking ins and yes, it's like this reversal and then integrating that, maybe.
No,
I mean, I think one thing that Burning Man has done well as far as big art. You know, I mean, that's one thing where, taking big art projects in the desert, and then actually, now them being like on the Vegas Strip or Miami, like the main thing, that it's got this huge projects, even like in Golden Gate Park, there was that, and the tree was it older mother or something, and there was a big event last night. It drew like people of all ages, and I think just to stop and maybe somebody who never considered being an artist or who knows, it's their day-to-day job, actually took a moment out, saw some big art, maybe got inspired. So that's one way I think Burning Man, I think just does try to, where people, starting lots of social organizations. Some of it is going to lead us to wealth. I mean, it is the really interesting part. But that's one thing I think Burning Man has done well, is puts a big art out in the world and make that, a notable, inspiring thing to do.
So I want to bring the focus back on stage here to Zach. And this is a very lively conversation. I wonder if we can bring it back to the mission of what you're trying to do here, because we went on a couple of different threads, and I think there's a lot of scope to continue having this conversation afterwards. But I want to get back to, you had initially had a question, Gus, and I'm wondering if we can synthesize this back into what you're attempting to do here in defining and supporting this culture.
So there is a mission, and it's defined, and it's not our job to write it. It's our job to describe what's happening.
Which is the 10 principles of Burning Man, right? They were descriptive, not prescriptive.
Exactly. And so first of all, Burning Man, wildly successful. It is one of the most well-known events in the world. It has influenced culture at a level that no other event has over the last generation. So like, whatever y'all think about Burning Man, like, hats off, those guys crushed it. Like, they took a really fringe thing, and self-expression, all this stuff was really fringe 20 years ago. It is not at all anymore. So I just want to always hat tip to Burning Man, all the grief everyone gives them. I think we should be celebrating them as well as others. But I digress. I always want to defend Burning Man.
You can. You're allowed to.
But in following suit of what they did with the 10 principles, there's a great quote from Eric Hoffer, who said, the leader doesn't show up, the movement builds, or the leader doesn't define a movement creates, and then a leader shows up. Right, and so they think with Burning Man, they didn't write the principles and then Burning Man happened. Burning Man happened and then they wrote the principles. So what my argument is that the movements happened. The cultural revolution, the global movement that we all feel part of, it's in full swing. Like, we live in the middle of it. It is fully happening. And so we don't have to create this movement or write its mission. We just need to figure out how to effectively and simply define it so that people can feel like they're part of it, irregardless of the resources they have, what events they can attend, or where they are in the world, and they can just access it online, find other people like them, and just ask each other for help, and just know where each other are. And that's what we are trying to do with my place, at least. Like, where are my people? Everyone's everywhere. Because of the internet, I've met so many people all over the world. Even if you've never traveled, you have friends everywhere. So where are they? Where do I have a home around the world? So I look at things in describing this mission. There was another thing that I cite all the time is this great book called Cultural Creatives. If anyone's ever seen this work, I think it came out of Yale. It's a couple, and they ran the stats department at Yale for like 30 years. I could be wrong on the university. And they ran a master poll across all of the work they've done. They were hired to do all the polling for all these different things for over 30 years, and they fed in their own questions so that they had this meta study across the world of 30 years. And when they retired, they published a book called The Cultural Creatives, and it tracks all of the issues-based movements from 1960 to 1990. And these movements are the women's movement, the environmental movement, organic movement, gay rights, all the issues-based movements. There's about 30 of them that have happened since the 60s to today, or to the 90s. And they found that the largest defined majority of people in the world that transcends race, religion, geography, or socioeconomic class was a group of people. It's about 37% of the world, give or take 2 points, depending on the location, which is the next largest majority was about 6% of people. So it's 37% of the global population is a large group. And these are the people who believed in 17 or more of these things. And the other groups of people believed in 1, 2, or 0. So the people who have a shared, and the most commonly held belief amongst those people, 37% of the world, is that it's just them and their friends and the whole world's crazy.
So Jack,
So when I hear people say, whatever blessings I've been given in life, I end up in rooms with wealthy people all over the world. That's been my lot, and so this is the group I talk to. And the common thing is it's just us, and we only have this mindset because we're so privileged, and we have all these things wrong. That a lot of people believe in this stuff, and to think it's just us, and to think it's because of how successful or lucky or wealthy we are, wrong. This is a large global identity movement, and it's very much in swing, and it's our job to help with our time, our extra time, our access, our resources, and our education that we have to define these things to help other people share resources or feel part of it or feel connected and feel holding. I mean, we all hear about the loneliness epidemic. It's because your corner church isn't where you find community anymore, and that's really new. That's like drastically new. And so people are looking in the past. That's why you see when things like this happen in the world, if you study history, you see large swings into fundamentalism when things like this happen, because people are like, they just are like, fuck it, I'm gonna be a Luddite. Like, I can't, it's too much. Let's just go back to the way it was because I knew how that worked. Well, it's different now. And so it's not your corner church. So where is it? It's certainly not in the metaverse, right? I don't think any of us see a future where we want to connect with community through VR goggles. I don't know why we all keep building that. Can we stop? Like, I don't want to build things that I don't want to be part of. And, I think we should maybe divert resources elsewhere. But I do think there is this hybrid digital reality thing that we're all living in, where all of us here have an avatar. That avatar is probably a photo of you, maybe a couple years ago, but it's a photo of you. It's your real identity. It's your real name. It's linked to your address, your location. It gets you Ubers. It connects you to your friends. It has all your phone books. It has all your information, and it helps you navigate the world in a new way. That identity, that thing connects with people globally. That's a new thing. And it's really cool, but it's not finding connection in my local community only. I'm not saying we shouldn't have community identity and connection in our local community, but there's also something else now. And we have to kind of like journey to discover what that is, free from judgments of how bad all these things are.
So we started the conversation with this idea that you have a question that no one can answer.
Yeah.
Which is a great thing to have if you're going to do a podcast. You can just keep asking the same question until you finally get someone who can answer it. But I feel like, in a sense, you're kind of touching the elephant, and you're part of what. And part of why my encouragement here is like, let's look at equity and access as part of it. Like different parts of the elephant that you know what it is, but you don't quite know how to describe it. And your journey of trying to understand more deeply how to articulate it and invite people into it is akin to this. The elephant thing I'm talking about is, you feel the trunk, you think it's one thing, you feel the tail, you think it's one thing. 5 blind guys and an elephant. So you're one blind guy with an elephant. And does that metaphor still hold? Anyway, I see what your project is right now as being that, and this conversation is one more step in that direction of asking you to define, asking to articulate, pointing things that feel off, and I think that's really the project that you're on right now.
Yeah.
Is that accurate?
I feel like if I have this conversation with a lot of smart people loudly, then we'll more quickly get to potential solutions.
You need some fools in there too, though, not just smart people, because smart people sometimes don't see obvious things.
Which is why we're doing this conversation.
Wow, you wanted to get a laugh right at the end, didn't you?
I had to get one. I've been so. The only person who's ever taken a rip at answering this question, it was like late at night. I threw this question out at Elon, and he was like, "Oh yeah, let's just keep building it. That's what I'm building," and I was like. He's like, and you look, and it's like infrastructure projects to connect global community in ways that are decentralized from governments and free of power, like accessing power differently, accessing communications differently. And I was like, so you think it's a thing? He's like, I think you should just keep building it, and we should all just keep building it. And I was like, for him, he was like, yeah, no brainer. This is the answer. No one else has been able. And so as much shit as we give that guy, like, there's a different game that's being played now. Right? It's a global game. That's what's happening. And do I want to build the infrastructure layer for it? Probably not. But I think what I like to get at is the soft stuff. America was just a branding exercise. It's a great identity building exercise. And what happened in America in the 1770s? And guns. But it was a branding exercise with guns.
A very different branding exercise, actually.
Yeah, I mean,
you got to move fast.
So you got me right before my disclaimer. So the disclaimer is like, for all the things that weren't equitable and inclusive and all of the crazy stuff that happened in America in the 1700s, there was one of the most profoundly successful identity creation things that's ever happened in modern era. And we have a melting pot of cultures and civilizations and religions that have come together in a place. People who were disenfranchised all over the world. Unfortunately, there were people that were already living there, and I don't want to get into that right now, and I don't support that. But there were people that were my ancestors from both sides. One was being pogromed, and then so they left and came to America, and the other one ran out of food in Ireland, so they came to America. Right? There's a great mechanism that was done to create new identity out of multiple identities. Something along those lines that's more inclusive, not based in somewhere in a specific land where people already live, but something like that. I feel like would be really an interesting project to go on now that we're, yeah.
You gotta remember what enabled that. It's the coalescing of the American identity, especially as being the erasure of your Irish or your Italian or your Polish mattering particularly strongly within the American context, was the fact that it was pointing out that you weren't Black. And so whiteness was created in a response to being able to identify as people as less than. And so the melting pot aesthetic really only applied because it was okay, we're going to erase these national boundaries of this of the cultures you come from to create more cultural hegemony, for sure.
For white people.
You had a really useful mechanism of the decider, right? The transistor to be yes or no, right? To be are you Black or are you not? And having really strict rules of that. And then having the inclusion or exclusion of the groups being defined from that, right? And so the cultural exercise, the cultural kind of product of that obviously is what we have now, but I think it's really hard to do if we don't have something to point to.
If we don't have an other.
Yeah.
So that's the defined by negation.
Exactly.
Yeah, if you don't have something to find yourself as the superior opposite of, which is what whiteness was,
Yeah.
then you can't do the same sort of like, come be part of us so that you're not the bad thing that is rejected. You get to be part of the good thing that we are.
And that's a great point. I mean, there's a phenomenal book that I read in college when we studied these topics that was like, it's called Us and Them, Us versus Them. And you cannot have an us without a them. Was the premise of the book.
Is our them like MAGA? I don't know what they call themselves. The Trump people? Is that our other? Are they the ones that we are superior opposite? No, I'm serious.
Yeah.
Like, are we defining ourselves as we are the superior opposite of the Trump people? Is this movement, if you were to frame it as the defined by negation thing, is that like?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I love to throw those questions to the group because I always think like, you get these,
that is a cop out. You can't throw the question.
No,
to the group.
you get these weird things where you get
you must answer.
People are like, we're all one, and my response to that is, first of all, definitely not. Like, definitely not. There are some rapists. There's racists. There's people who kill people. There's people who conduct crime who are fully morally not allowed in my house. I am not Jesus. I'm not trying to be friends with there's enough people in the world right now that those people are definitely not me. So I don't know how to define that, but they're like people who are passing legislation to limit to limit women's controls over their own body. They're not in my club. They can't come to the party. I don't know how we define that group as America, to bring it back to the 1770s, they created two documents. We are the Declaration of Independence and a Constitution. And it said, we're not this. We're this. So do we have to do that as a collective? Do we have to say, we have to declare our cultural and identity and community independence from the lands of our passports towards this other thing that we'll yet to define? I don't know what the experiments are or the games that we need to play to do this. One question, am I crazy?
Yes.
Am I crazy?
Yeah.
Does that people resonate with this in some way, shape, or form?
Good crazy, but crazy.
You're radical, which is good.
Good.
So
hopefully not radical enough for jail.
So we're coming energetically towards a landing spot here, and interestingly opening up a lot of questions. And I think if we follow any of these juicy threads, we've got another 30 minutes in us. And I don't think that's where we are today, but that's actually very exciting because it gives you podcasts to go do. Now you have to go do podcasts on all this stuff, and it's recorded, so I can hold you accountable. I just a question for the group. As we kind of close the us mainly talking part, choose your own adventure. We can either continue in this format, including more of the group and questions and that sort of thing, or we can kind of close down this and continue conversation within the room in different ways. Do you want to do more question answer conversation in this format, or do you want to do? Okay, that sounds very enthusiastic. Well, wait, let's let the opposition have their voice. Does anyone not want that? Does anyone want to do more just close this now and do casual stuff? Okay, all right. Well,
I wanted to grab you then.
Actually, can we do mics?
I don't know that.
I don't know. Maybe we don't need mics. Okay, go ahead.
Do we need mics?
Well, let's give it a try. And if you cannot hear, flag it. What is your name also?
My name's Albert. Thanks so much for what a evocative conversation. And thanks also for including the larger sphere, because that's at least the theme, at least for me, how do we have conversations where we create the community that you're trying to manifest. One of the things that was beautiful for me about the birth of these ideas was that it came out of Esalen. And I lived at Esalen for 5 years. One of the things about Esalen was this notion that nobody captures the flag. And one of my stories, you know that, right? So, and my worry about kind of this whole mission-driven thing, I think there was that kind of concern about okay, here's the flag, everybody follow me. And at least for me, there's different ways of having things happen. Sometimes things happen from, here's the flag, come follow me, mark my charge, right?
Yeah.
And there's more what you might call a top-down approach, right? Versus a more kind of wilding approach, right? The more bottom-up approach. There's there's a murmuring underneath, and we don't have the words for it, but we all feel it. And just even honoring the feeling that calls us to places like maybe this, right? And we don't even know, maybe there's loose names for it, but at least I worry that old thing about like the Tao that can be named is not the Tao itself.
Of course.
You can't eat the menu.
The idea of just sitting with the question instead of trying to find the word that almost limits it into a box for the answer.
Yes, in every way, yes. I think I want to try to address that in a couple different ways. I don't expect to come up with the answer. I think that the conversation and the journey to the answer brings up the feeling in a way that people who maybe have not been in rooms like this can feel it, and at least allows us a format for talking about it. Talking about how we can help and how we can come together and experiments that can pull off of this. I absolutely don't and didn't have this conversation publicly because I don't want to be seen in any saying I know it, I'm here.
Don't worry, you don't.
Yeah, I mean, but like I don't want that. I don't think anyone wants that. But I do think the thing that my fear is the onboarding ramp to the feeling is hard. If you're not surrounded by a community of people who think like this and you want to be part of it, if there's not a simple way to find it, it's almost impossible to feel connected to. And so it feels like that would be a helpful thing for others.
Quick question about being connected to it, that we want accessibility, but there's also a little, maybe there's some aspect of an initiatory process too, like that there's some sort of like ways that you enter into certain kinds of knowing that is necessary as part of the acculturation process to any kind of culture. There's always that tension of like everyone should come to Burning Man, but you also got to know what you're doing there, because if everyone just comes and they don't know, then you lose the culture. That's a tension that's been
I think a rite of passage is an interesting thing. But also to address the other thing that you mentioned, you talked about the Tao. There's books about it. There's famous teachers. There's like retreat centers. There's a word for it. It's called the Tao. I can talk about it now because I have that word and I know enough about it because I've studied with teachers and read books and done Qigong with Mac on the deck. That's one. But like, I think that it's the journey to helping us be able to better articulate what it is that we're feeling that can help us land in it more comfortably and help invite others along. That's kind of my like only response, or only way I can get at a response to. I've thought about what you're saying a lot.
Yeah, so I think I mistook this kind of passionate, like we must find the answer to a certain attachment, and what I'm hearing is like, let's all gather together and sit with the question, right? As a potent kind of thing, and I
Yeah, and I think we don't sit with the larger question enough. I think what happens as a culture right now is we look at how bad are fossil fuels, how bad is social media. Not wow, we just connected the world. What can we do? What can we do with this next? Now that we have this thing alive, it seems to be like solving horrible microscopic problems, not looking at how we can progress this whole culture forward now that we all can talk to each other. So I was reading a bunch of Marshall McLuhan the other night, and I was like, all right, this guy, they talked about this. This is not a new challenge, right?
So some facilitation housekeeping. If there's a way to open up the space a little bit, to turn chairs a little bit towards opening up.
Oh yeah, it would really, if you two just go.
Short answers from you.
Okay.
And just give it a little bit of, because there's a lot of interest in sharing.
Let's talk to each other.
So there's a lot of interest in sharing, and my invitation is to be quite potent, and we'll do our best to be potent up here too, so that people get a chance to. So versus sort of long explanatory stories. See if we can get like the most potency of what you want to say, and we'll also be potent too. You've been raising your hand a lot. So what is your name?
JP.
Hi, JP.
No, I was very inspired. I think, the whole burner meets Renaissance, I think, is a great model. Just a question from this, a good story from this week was the Bay Bridge Lights coming back on, which I think is a civic project, but didn't ask any government money. It was kind of very self-funded. In a way, very Renaissance, because kind of all the people giving back to it. So I guess what did they get right, and how is that like a Kickstarter type campaign, or how could that be replicated, do you think? Because that's like some fun news.
Yeah, Bay Bridge is great. I think that the art that came out of Burning Man and its impact in the world has been phenomenal. The recognition of the art of Burning Man in this National Museum and the Smithsonian rocketed these artists' careers into places they never could have imagined. The public art is incredible, and I think more of that with the art. That art exists in the world because it was funded, because it had a mechanism for being funded and it had a place to go. It wasn't created because of the market, which I think makes it interesting. But I don't know I'm not an art person, so I don't know what in there we can see in other places.
Maybe solve like an environmental problem.
Yeah.
Is it almost like a Kickstarter model where you think it's decentralized, get out the message?
Yeah, the story I always thought it was like if someone just said, hey, we're gonna build a thing and we're gonna focus all the collective energy of the world on forests. Everyone can give us $1 and we'll like steward forests globally. And we have actually authority to do that. I think everyone will give them $1. If someone else is like, hey, I got like water, instead they have like these microscopic nonprofits that are competing viciously. The one time I worked in philanthropy and nonprofits we worked in a refugee project. It was the most vicious competition for donor and storytelling I've ever experienced in my professional career. So we got to eliminate that if we want to solve global problems as a collective. We tried this in the UN. Yeah.
I'm just curious, is there an app that is connecting this community?
Make another app, Zach.
That's what I want to do.
Make another app.
Do you know any venture
Make
capitalists?
it.
Does anyone know any venture capitalists?
But there isn't one.
There's not an app for this. What I've envisioned in the past was just an app that plotted people on a map and showed their movements. That's really it. Nothing much more than that, in a way to surface projects and collect resources for projects. But that's what people want. It's like another social network. Yeah. So.
I love the idea of Ron Day, where it's people meeting up in real life and finding people.
Yeah.
How are people gonna?
We have the data with MyPlace. We can see where everyone lives and where they're traveling to, and who they're connected to globally. So that was the idea was maybe if we do it through housing, one day we have enough data for this to do that. But
maybe you will.
Yeah.
So when you were talking about the cultural creatives, right? That was Paul Ray.
Yep.
And I looked it up. That book came out 20 years ago.
Yeah.
2020. And I'm thinking back, there was a lot of movement, and then it sort of went away. A lot of people never even heard of it, right? So when you're talking about this whole movement, you keep up, when you use Burning Man as a reference, and that is a small group. And you said that Friday when I listened to you all, right? So what I was thinking, it's a bigger consciousness elevation movement, but then I realized consciousness is even kind of a, highfalutin word. Right?
Saying you have an elevated consciousness is also saying, and other people don't.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. How about just a movement and a culture of human goodness?
Yeah.
See, everybody can relate to that. Because that's what you were talking about. The 30% of the people, 37% of the people who were part of the cultural, creatives movement. The way I looked at those people, they were all about just being good humans.
Yeah.
Right? So now being good humans, you don't have to go to Burning Man. It doesn't matter whether you're into Jesus or you're a working class person doing 3 jobs or you're living in a developing nation. Barely making it. You care about human goodness.
There's a collective set of values that I think people have that's pretty clear.
So how come nobody's done it so simple like that?
I don't know. You try to write these things down and they get real hippie quickly. But if you look at if you reread the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, they're like, it's basically like saying we're all one in a really hippie woo-woo way, but with like lawyers
and slaves.
and it's like, but yeah, true. But like when you read what they wrote, I mean, there's a freaking Eye of Isis and a pyramid on the dollar, just without the sacred geometry and so there's.
Yeah, so how can we learn this so everybody can
Maybe we write. Maybe we.
feel like it's almost, the upper middle class American rules.
What do you think?
Well, like, as a counterpoint, perhaps to what you were saying before, like, why isn't the answer leadership and articulation of the values? Like, say that all these people have these similar values, but it hasn't been defined, so they don't realize that they have similar values. We like the Burning Man principles, but want to expand out. Why isn't it leaders and a constitution?
I tried to get Larry to do that with me when he was still alive at an Esalen event that we did together, and he like laughed about it. But
I think one of the issues around leaders, and not that there shouldn't be different leaders in different ways, but as you can probably tell, that in these sort of like alternative spiritual communities, they get super culty super quickly. And so there's a big risk in terms of people taking the mantle and being like, this is my thing. Because when you do a lot of psychedelics and you start to believe that you are God, and then people tell you that you are the leader, then it gets messianic and it's a little tricky. And I think that we don't actually have enough prophylactics for that in this culture, where like, what I like about what you're doing is that you're like living the questions themselves. That was the comment that you were making earlier about living the questions. To me, there's like a humble position of leadership through questioning. That's really interesting to me. But if someone says like I have the flag, I'm the guy, and it would be I'm the guy, by the way. It would be I'm the guy. I'm the guy.
A guy would do this.
A guy would do it. Yeah, of course. I would do it if you guys let me do it. But like I'm the guy. And so now it's my thing. There's just it's like the one ring will corrupt you completely. And so I think the question is like leadership and definitions, the exploration of that is really interesting. But I think that we also need to parallel process a lot of guardrails around that because of how like out of control spiritual narcissism is just anyway. So there's something to be careful about there.
Defining the principles.
One thing that's been present for me and that has given me like hope, I guess, around this is like the principle that it only takes 144,000 beings. That's like in Gene Keys and other texts that like, it's like the 100% monkey effect. When like 100 people are monkeys know something, then all monkeys do. So it's like, it's not that the whole world or even millions of people, it's when 144,000 of us, I think, are operating operating at a certain level, that's the tipping point, I guess. So like, it occurs for me that it is this blend of like leadership of just how are we all empowering each other to be that version of ourselves, that be on that journey together and recognize we're a network.
Recognition of the fact that we're part of something together that's not exclusive. And Caveat said it on Friday night. It was like one of the cool things that's been true about Burning Man culture from the beginning is anyone can come. Like really, and that was way more true when the tickets were free. But now, if you don't have money and you want to come, you write them, they give you a ticket. Like this has to be anyone can come, and we have to be able to define it in some way to say that we're. The unfortunate part is you have to people call themselves Taoists, right? So what is the ist of this thing, and do we even? Do we need to be all under one thing? How else would you ever collect resources for larger collective action? The cool thing about a nation in its purest form is that it's the most effective way we've figured out to collect resources and collectively steward the both experience of the people living in a piece of land and protect that piece of land. For better or worse, lots of countries have done it quite well. Better than we were doing it before. Is it as good as we can do? No, but it's in many ways better than we were doing it before. The small groups of organization were only possible when we had thousands of people living in a place. But when we have millions of people living in a place, you have to figure out a way to deal with the poop. Just a lot of poop. I built enough events around the world that when everyone's like, we're going to bring 10,000 people together, I'm like, man, you better have a good plan for dealing with all that shit. And so, but realistically, we have to figure out a way to collect resources to solve problems. And you look at a time when this happened before is after the introduction of the atomic bomb into the world. The whole world got together and was like, we all need to sit at a table and not do that again. And they created this thing called the United Nations. So this idea that we're talking about has happened before at scale. Did the United Nations like nail it? It doesn't seem like they did, but they at least gave it a shot. So something like that feels interesting.
I don't know. I think it's going to be something that will have nothing to do with our images from the past.
Agreed. And that's why the United Nations, I think, failed, because it still was a group of nations.
Yeah. Can I see hands of everyone who still has something they'd like to contribute or ask? Because we're gonna raise your hands now, because these will be the remainder of the people who are sharing in this format.
One, two.
So we have two.
Three.
Okay, great.
Okay.
Wait, I see 1, 2, 3. Yes, 1, 2, 3. Okay, go ahead.
I've been studying social movements of change also, and one of the defining features of the most successful ones is that they frame an opportunity rather than a threat. And we found that actually groups of about 5 to 15 people meeting regularly over time form the strongest unit of social change. So like the civil rights movement, actually the evangelical movement, which I heard about in a return session, where there was a woman you brought off the mat, I can't remember her name.
Yep.
She had gone and studied with the evangelical movement. But it really is true that when small groups form together, they form a more stable bond, and there's accountability and culture build and so forth. And then just really using the principles of social psychology leverage points, like identifying where in a system things are most open to change and being really specific about that. So if there is to be like a specific movement that's formed with leadership, just sort of offering those into the circle with this idea of like, we're not just trying to define the elephant, like our idea is to make it better. Right?
Totally.
Make a better elephant.
And I think that's real.
Multi-generational. We want diverse voices, and we want to center women. And so we can actually make this diffuse culture better by adding some of those things in.
Without question. It's a great.
And that's part of what we're doing today is we're talking to you about this project that you're doing, and like inviting you to think about exactly this kind of question. Like, as you're trying to communicate and define, can you nudge in certain ways? Can you bring in certain voices? Can you walk the walk of the better version of the thing that you already see? That's rhetorical. You don't have to answer. But that's I think that's part of what's happening here.
Not answering because you told me not to.
I didn't say you didn't have to.
And I think, but that's what you do with your work as well, too. I mean, a lot of people will say that they first got turned on to this culture through festival culture. I mean, this is the opening point of millions of people, is through these transformational experiences that happen globally.
Yeah, and just one follow-on, I mean, just to keep recentering, like we're having a crisis of youth mental health. And youth are not necessarily best served by a festival per se that has a lot of drug use and whatever, like a 12-year-old girl. If we focus on what could we do to really bring 12-year-old girls who really are going to be the future of humanity in many ways, I mean, boys and girls, but like, what can we do to support that community that we know has been really harmed by social media, right? But also they're the ones who are the early adopters, and how can that's when I say multi-generational, like we don't want it to just be 25 to 55, right? Or whatever. Like we want grandmas to be able to be part of this movement. We want 6-year-olds to be part of it.
The fun part about our generation right now, or the people that are alive right now, is there's a generation before us, our elders, that totally get what we're talking about. And the generation that's coming behind us that probably gets it better. I've had this conversation often with my father, who was very active in the 60s in civil rights and the anti-war protests and stuff. And he made an astute argument or a point that he's like, the thing that you have that I didn't have is me. Because if my dad went and talked to his dad about what he was doing in Boston College in 1969, his dad was a child of the Depression and World Wars. And he was like, what are you talking about? Like, take the money, hide it under the mattress. I talked to my dad, and he's like, okay, so when you shut down the university, you want to make sure, So it's awesome. And the other point that I've heard in the past that's really amazing about the generation after us is this dream was alive and well and very present in culture in the 60s and the 70s and 80s. And many of those people had to just stop and go get jobs. Dream didn't die. The dream don't die. So the second it glimmers up again, they're like pulling levers at large companies and helping you, and they have access to a lot of resources. So there's a really interesting leverage point that we have right now, where all the generations present get it, and it's not just like one new youth movement. We're definitely not a youth movement anymore, unfortunately. But yeah, it's a great point. Let's talk. I want to talk more about this with you. I want to learn more. Please.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if there's a question, but like, I feel it's not like a governance question, I don't think. And I don't think it's more of a coordination question basis of like attitude. Like, there's no spiritual core or hope or optimism that people have to tie to. Like, we have all the tools and resources in the world. Like, if there's a natural disaster, imagine if like we have the logistics of UPS with like Starlink internet access with like, like that in alone could fix the disaster in like hours.
Yeah, Amazon and Starlink together can pretty much get you resources and get you back online pretty quickly.
Sure, but like, they don't coordinate well, and there's like so many different like nodes, and like there isn't like a central belief system or identity, and it's like why don't people feel? How can we like create more hope and like optimism and like a togetherness that doesn't exist today?
Yeah, I mean, every room we sit in and we have this conversation, everyone's like, well, we have all the resources at our fingertips. It's like, yeah, but how do we use them? I mean, one of the cool things about national governments is when there's a crisis, they can actually commandeer the resources of private companies and use them to solve the crisis. So like what you're saying is if there's a Starlink and Amazon are global companies, if something happened, if someone could be like, okay, let's put the resources on solving this problem, they would just do it. We could solve a problem, What are the barriers to that? Elon and Jeff Bezos talking friendly way, I don't know, but like there's
come from like the mass people.
The masses, yeah.
Feel like a culture of like wanting or like pushing, leaders to do that, right? Like end of the day, like answer to who they're selling to, who their consumers are, who their like constituents are. But like, what could inspire people to feel? I don't know that many people who feel that much hope or belief in their politicians, their company.
Yeah, writing a letter to your senator is not going to move Amazon's resources in any way.
Right. It's like, what is the thing that's going to push people to feel like they can resonate with each other and trust each other? I think it's part of your spiritual practice.
Trust is a really important thing, but trust is important that you bring up. How do we create a mechanism where everyone trusts each other, at least enough to do collectively act together?
Wasn't that the journey of us moving from our heads into our hearts? Yeah. We're all having coherence in our hearts. We like trust each other and we're communicating telepathically and connected.
True. Sloan?
Final question, share, engagement.
Do you want to wrap? You want to bring it in?
Bring us home.
Are you all open to taking 3 breaths with me?
Oh, we could have started that way. Man, good.
I'm open to it.
There's no beginning, no end, so here we are again. Nice to see you.
Sweet. Thank you so much.
That was a great share. Thank you.
You're so good, Eamon. Thank you so much for helping and for doing this and for setting everything up.
A pleasure. I believe in you. Thank you. I'm helping you because I believe in you. Like, I really do. And I think that what I like, and this is kind of what I've been going on about in this conversation, is that we get to hold you accountable. And that is exciting to me. It's exciting that you have the gift of gab. I don't in this moment. You have the gift of gab, and you have an extraordinary network. And if you put your shoulder to the wheel, you will make some moves. And if we are part of that, then we can hold you accountable and we can all be a part of that direction. And so that's something that I was really interested in people sharing today. And on that note, Zach has released a podcast, just released a podcast. It's called Conversations with Zach Bell. As someone who podcasts and produces podcasts, I can tell you that when people get engaged with the podcast early on, it's very helpful. And so I would encourage people who believe in Zach and enjoy this conversation to check out that podcast. And it does matter when you put stars on it. It doesn't take you very long, but it actually really matters to like put a little energy, which will be supportive to your mission in continuing to build this. And there's a feature that Spotify has where you can ask a question or you can respond to a podcast in the Spotify app. And that might be a way, if you don't have a direct line to Zach too, to like engage with him making this better, because this is the starting place of a journey, and it's a humble starting place, which I appreciate. And there's a lot of opportunity to give feedback and support along the way. So for all of you who are here today, my invitation to you is help us keep Zach on the straight and narrow. No, not on the straight and narrow. Help us help Zach.
Just trying to build a global commune. I don't know why we don't have it. Everyone talks about it. I don't know why we don't have one.
Yeah, but no cult leaders.
Just trying
no cult leaderless. I'm saying it as much for me as for you.
Leaderless commune. I don't know why we don't have one.
Anyway,
no one's got plenty of money. Let's make it happen.
Thank you all so much for being here in this beautiful afternoon light on a sunny Sunday.
Thank you, Onwin, for keeping it together, and Seth for setting this up. Everybody for making the space exist.
Yeah, and
it's so great to see everybody too. I have such good friends here.
Big thank you to the Portal too. Portal is also fresh and new. So please engage with this space, which is so beautiful that we've been in. Thank you. Good work.
Thank you.
You did good.